Danger and chaos gives meaning to life. I'm paraphrasing here, but I believe it was Nietzsche who said something along the lines that the greatest men are often the closest to danger. Have you ever had a near-death experience? And in this, I'm not talking about being bedridden, perhaps in a hospital, suffering from some sort of dire ailment. What I'm talking about is perhaps a car crash or a variety of things. I had a near-death experience back in March of 2018. I almost had my face blown off. I believe this event, it lasted for a couple of hours. It culminated in what I just spoke about, but the events that transpired beforehand and the events that came about after, rarely have I ever felt more alive. It seems that oftentimes the closest to death that you are, the more alive that you feel. You see, your adrenaline is pumping, and this doesn't, just necessarily apply to any sort of near-death experience. It can apply as well to any intense competition, any fight, any struggle. The adrenaline is pumping, your senses are hyper sharpened, your reaction time is lower. You feel alive, truly alive. I think nowadays in modernity, most people, you see, humans value security. And I'm no different myself. We all value security. But do you ever grow discontent, frustrated, depressed, or angry with the everyday mundane existence of going to work for some corporation and just the day-to-day grind? Do you feel alive during these times? I have to admit, I don't always feel that way. Let me take a seat here. We'll talk more about this. This video will be rambling. It's just the way that I am. If you don't like it, you can go elsewhere. It doesn't bother me, I don't care. We're going to go down several tangents. But what the overarching message of this video is that we're going to look at the horror and the beauty of accelerationism. War is politics by other means. And I'm paraphrasing again, of course. I believe it was Karl von Clausewitz who had made this observation. Our nature, the nature of this universe of life, is to struggle. And I think modern man, including our own race, we have neglected this and forgotten it. Struggle is our God. As Judge Holden had said in Blood Meridian, war is God. Now, accelerationism. Accelerationism, people are frightened of it. There are people who are opposed to accelerationism. People are frightened of it because accelerationism leads to a loss of security. It leads to chaos. And in these various internet cliques and circles, I mean, you look at it, any sort of extreme political movement, whether it is left or right, in these racialist spheres, these white nationalist spheres, whatever, there is no shortage of snitches, informants, perhaps agent provocateurs. And in what you could call some of these accelerationist circles, it's very safe to say that there's probably a lot of these things. A lot of these devious, dangerous, and nefarious characters. But nevertheless, as I've said before, I would consider myself to be an accelerationist. I've made it abundantly clear in several videos why it is that I hold these views. You see, I think for the survival of our race, we're going to have to adopt a revolutionary mindset. And accelerationism is a revolutionary mindset. Now, I would be lying to you if I was to say that violence wasn't a part of accelerationism. Now, I've got to make this gay disclaimer. I'm not encouraging anyone to engage in any illegal activities. I feel like I have to say that all the time now because of things that I have witnessed, things that I'm sure you all have witnessed as well. You have to watch what you say. But I've made it abundantly clear where I stand regarding violence. I'm not encouraging it, but I understand it has its place and time. And I'm not a disavower, not in the least. I never will be. Because if someone lashes out violently against the system, you see, there's a lot of debate in these circles, especially with the recent mass shootings. You can think about the trainee shooting up the school up in Nashville. The recent Mexican that shot up that mall down in somewhere in Texas. I think it was Allen, Texas. You know, I see a lot of people in our circles and people that are on our peripheries doing the same sort of research and looking into the past of these characters that commit these acts of violence. And I do not deny, I do believe that federal agencies, intelligence agencies, I certainly do believe that they have a hand in perhaps grooming or, you know, coercing these people. After all, there is much to be gained from this. You know, they're trying to disarm us all here in America, things of that nature. They want a population that is tense and, you know, terrified. You know, it's really a real fucking mess, to put it bluntly. But you know, perhaps I should be careful how I should word this. You know, I see people digging into the past of this person and all these things. Personally, let me phrase this carefully. I feel sorrow and heartbreak for the victims. But I mean, how many mass shootings have we seen over the last several years? A lot of them don't even make the news, of course, and we know why that is. Gang-related violence and shit. But, you know, a lot of people look into it, they're like, oh, this is a psyop and all that. You know, I really don't care anymore. I have looked into it. I haven't looked into it at all, really. And I'm not going to. Because I really just don't care. I know that sounds callous, but refer to what I said earlier about the victims. I just don't really care. I mean, what use is it? Yes, I understand these things happen. I understand that there's usually agencies that provoke these things. I mean, if you think about it, the very system itself provokes a lot of this. Or it should, you could say. I mean, look at it. Look at the degeneration and the current state of Ameriquois society. It's disgusting. It's degenerate. It's filth. The scum of the earth is heralded as heroes and victims, martyrs for a cause, while those of an exceptional spiritual quality and character are frowned upon usually. It's disgusting. I'm not really interested anymore in looking as to whether things are psyops or not, per se. Because I feel like, what is the use anymore? I feel like I've been streamlining. What use is all this varied knowledge on so many different things and so many topics? What use is having this knowledge if it does not help you in some form or fashion acquire power? And going back to violence, I will never disavow violence against the system. True violence that isn't coerced, that isn't provoked by some sort of agency, you could say. A genuine lashing out of the system. I will never disavow this. I will never do that, because if you think about it, the system that we labor under is the most violent monstrosity that this world has ever seen. I mean, look at it. All through the blood-soaked history of this country, the system is the most violent thing. It is more violent than any sort of domestic terrorist, as they would label them. I don't disavow it. And we are often conditioned to view violence as the worst of evils. I mean, and look at who's promoting this message. It's the system itself. Of course, they want you to think that. Violence is liberating, as my friend said. Violence is liberating. But, of course, you have to be extremely careful with violence and how you might administer it. And I'm talking about all forms of violence. I'm not talking about, just politically driven murder, all these things. I'm not talking about that. I mean, it could just be a fist fight. Violence is liberating, but of course it can also lead to enslavement, death, all these things. You have to be careful with it. And I know this video is probably quite edgy, but we have to look at these things and we have to examine them. This platform may take it down. We'll see. We'll see what happens. But that's just something to think about. And accelerationism is often viewed as a violent sort of ideology. There is what I would call hot revolution or aggressive accelerationism. Those sort of acts we can't really talk about. Can't talk about them on here. There are people getting hemmed up left and right. And then there is what I would call cold revolution or passive acceleration. You see, accelerationism, it is considered a dirty word in these circles by many, and I understand. But as I believe I had mentioned earlier, I think for our people to survive what is coming, we are going to have to adopt a revolutionary mindset. And I think that is something that is lacking in these circles, you could say. Well, I'm not going to say it's lacking completely, but it seems like most white nationalists, they currently want what America is today. They want their suburb. They just don't want many non-whites. They don't want degeneracy, the encouragement of your children to become trannies and homosexuals. They don't want these things. And of course, I don't want them either. Now we're going to look at the system. This is a term that I keep using. Many of us use this term. Some people have criticized this term for not being concise or direct enough. They claim that it is a sort of nebulous, all-encompassing term, which it is. But I think it's the best term because it describes, in my opinion, you-know-who-ish power, the government, the mass media complex, the military-industrial complex, capitalist corporations, the invaders who are encouraged to come here by our own governments, and all these things. You know, I've called it before the Hydra. The Hydra has many heads, but it is the system. And although that term is nebulous, all-encompassing, I think it is, for the sake of brevity, it is the best term that we can use. And since I've gotten out of the way talking about what I would consider hot revolution or aggressive accelerationism, we could talk a bit about passive accelerationism. You see, our people are a people of extremes. The native European is a people of extremes. We can be a people of extreme cruelty and malice, but we can also be a people of extreme kindness. We can also, you know, it's really interesting to look at what I would call white psychology. We value fairness and a variety of these other things, you could say. But of course, this is often turned against us. We are a people of extremes. However, modernity and civilization has done everything it can to either subvert these extremes into extreme nihilism and destructive habits, or it has worked feverishly to dull these extremes. The unfortunate truth is that the most of our race, if this civilizational model was to fail, was to collapse, many would perish. And I'm not saying I'm any higher or mightier than anyone else listening to this, because I mean, I may be in that category. We'll never know until such a thing happens. You know, a few years ago, I was much more nihilistic, you could say, when I got into this, when I started this channel. You know, while I would consider myself an accelerationist, you have to kind of guard against being perhaps overly accelerationist. Accelerationism is not an end, it is a means to an end. And what I like about accelerationism, this video I made a few months back called The Remnant. I believe accelerationism and the deterioration of civilization and society will force the remnant of our race to reveal itself. You know, a lot of people talk about dispensing the red pills en masse and all these things, which I do think some of our views have become mainstream over time. I mean, anti-Semitism is becoming mainstream. You look at what happened with all the shit with Kanye West. Here recently, this podcast called Fresh and Fit, I think they have 1.37, 1.38 million subscribers. They recently had Ryan Dawson on to talk about 9/11. Our views are becoming more mainstream. But after this dispension of knowledge, after putting all this knowledge out there, waking people up, what comes next? What comes next for these people? Oftentimes it leads to a sense of powerlessness, you could say. And I think that's very detrimental. You know, these people that are just woken up, you could say, they need something to do, something to work for. And there's many different paths that you could take with this. Many different paths. The path that I'm in favor of is passive accelerationism. It's something that Varg has mentioned in his videos where he talks about starving the beast. Passive accelerationism is starving the beast, I would say. It is doing everything you can to become self-reliant to the best of your abilities. But I feel like I've talked quite a bit for now. I'm going to take a break. I'm going to dive further into what I would consider the history of accelerationism. Deer over there in the distance. You probably can't see them. Maybe if I get up and spook them, you'll be able to see them. There they go. Oh well. First, let me talk a little bit about ideology, whatever. When I before I started this channel, I was considering calling it left-handed right-winger, because I admire contradictions, paradoxes, and oxymorons. But looking back on, the name Southern Nordic, kind of an oxymoron. If I had it back, I may have called myself more deer. I may have called myself Appalachian Nordic. But anyways, I am grateful that I decided against naming my channel Left-Handed Right-Winger, because over time I have adopted Metzger's position. I don't consider myself neither left nor right, but it seems that the masses still use this sort of paradigm to describe my ideology. I would just consider myself a native European racialist, a white separatist, tribalist, and, as I said, an accelerationist to a degree. Let me take a seat here. So, I know there's a lot of different labels, different political ideologies, philosophies, and things of that nature. Some people would call me NS. Perhaps there's some truth to that. I do have a certain admiration for that controversial political regime, but I don't entirely commit myself to that label. I don't entirely commit myself to any sort of political label other than being a racialist. It's pretty simplistic. What's good for our race is good. What's bad is negative. Pretty simplistic, and I guess there's a lot of differing opinions about what we all and what we each have as far as what is good and bad. But I'll get into that later. I do have an admiration for some of the old anarchists, like Pierre-Joseph Proudhon, Mikhail Bakunin. I'd like to study them further in the future. And the ideology that at this moment I find perhaps the most appealing, I guess the label, everybody in these circles likes to have clear and concise labels. I don't commit myself per se to any of these labels thoroughly, but the one I find that perhaps aligns the most with my views at this current time would be national anarchism. I do have some anarchic tendencies. But enough about ideologies. And what this ties into is that accelerationism is considered a sort of Marxist, or perhaps also reactionary, I guess depending which side of the political spectrum you would consider a person or yourself being. You see, there's a lot to be learned. There's a lot to be learned from our enemies. But let me come back to that and revert to my original train of thought. You see, accelerationism, it was the term I believe was first coined by a guy named Benjamin Noyes. You'll have to forgive me because I'm kind of in a rush to make this video and I didn't have time to prepare as well as I'd like to. So you'll have to forgive me there, but it was coined in 2010. And a guy named Nick Land, who is quite an interesting figure. You see, the way they talk about accelerationism is wanting to accelerate and amplify these sort of, what you could say, inconsistencies that capitalism has. Marx also spoke about this, I believe. And they also talk about accelerating towards a sort of technological singularity, which myself, I gotta admit, I'm pretty leery of technology, to a degree. Some of the technology advancements we see lately with AI, I will not deny, I find it kind of horrifying in a way. I do think Ted Kaczynski was correct about a lot of these things. But where was I going with this? There's another term too that I'm quite interested in. It's called spontaneism, or revolutionary spontaneity. This was a concept that Vladimir Lenin, argued against in his book, What is to be Done? I think it was written in 1902. He argued against revolutionary spontaneity. Well, what is revolutionary spontaneity? It is this idea that individual acts, the working class should have a revolutionary from below without any sort of political party as a sort of vanguard, you could say. Lenin argued against this. I think Rosa Luxemburg, I believe she advocated for revolutionary spontaneity. So see, I've mentioned a lot of names here. Lenin, Luxemburg, Marx. I've mentioned a lot of names that are what you could say is our enemies. The point I'm trying to illustrate to you is this. It doesn't hurt in the least to examine the ideologies of our enemies. A lot of the revolutionary thought that is available to us today comes from the left wing. It comes from communists, socialists. Because, I mean, if you think about it, so many of the prominent revolutions, could say the French Revolution, with their what was it? Fraternity, I can't remember. Like I said, I needed to prepare better. The Bolshevik Revolution, which was a definite admirer of the French Revolution. And then all these other little revolutions, both the ones that succeeded and the ones that failed. But you can learn a lot from your enemies. Your enemies There's a crow up there, sitting in the tree looking at me. Anyways, your enemies can be the best of teachers. But you know, that's just a little brief history of accelerationism. Maybe in the future, when I've got time, when I've had the time to prepare better, hopefully I could give you a little better explanation. I'm sorry, I'm distracted by this crow up here. The crow or the raven is a sort of holy animal to me. But I'll tell you about that at some point in the future. So now I guess we should talk about, there is two classified variants of accelerationism. Futurism is another interesting sort of ideology. Italian futurism. Marinetti was, I guess, the originator of this idea, this set of beliefs. I'd like to explore that more in the future. But there are two categories, they say. There's left-wing accelerationism and then right-wing accelerationism. With all this out of the way, I guess now I will attempt to answer the question of why I would consider myself to be an accelerationist. It's been a while since I've made a video down here in the basement. This is where I used to do my live streams. I'd like to start doing that again sometime. But to add to what I was talking about earlier regarding revolutionary spontaneity, there are two factions from the years of lead who used revolutionary spontaneity. Several months back, well, it's been almost a year ago, me and my friend Ronin did a stream about the years of lead. I think this is one of the best streams that I've ever put together. I'll put a link to it in the box below. But these two factions, and also, I forgot to mention, my friend Patrick, he did a couple of streams with Myth of the 20th Century. If I can remember, I'll put a link to those in... it's on BitChute. I'll put a link to those in the box below as well. There's a lot to be gleaned from the years of lead in Italy. The strategy of tension that the Italian government used, and Operation Gladio, which was, you know, the CIA stay-behind networks. But the two groups, the two factions I was going to talk about, the first one I will mention is the NAP, or the Nuclei Armati Proletari. They were the communist version, and they were pretty violent themselves. They recruited from jails and prisons. The other faction I wanted to mention was the Nuclei Armati Rivoluzionari, which I'm probably butchering that. Forgive me, Italian bros. This is my favorite faction from the years of lead out of the many different factions. They were extremely violent, and they were the fascist counterpart to the NAP. The NAP was founded first, and then the NAR burst onto the scene. I believe it was in 1977 up until 1981. There were 33 murders attributed to them. Officials, public officials, judges, and also the Bologna massacre, which was in, I believe, 1980. You'll have to forgive me again because it's been a while since I've went over this material. But the Bologna massacre has been attributed to the NAR, even though I believe they denied it. Still, 85 people lost their lives in a bombing at a train station in Bologna. So they were extremely violent. And you know, the NAR, it roughly translates to cellular armed revolution. And spontaneism is a very interesting thing to me. I'd like to do perhaps do a deeper dive into it here in the future. But now, let me talk about disavowers and Fed jacketers, you could say. I mentioned earlier, something that kind of irritates me to no end is whenever one of our guys, now, of course this is debatable, I understand that there are, psychological operations, things of that nature, but anytime someone acts up, chimps out, and does something, you will hear the usual right-wing talking heads, even including here the DR, or the dissident right, or whatever you want to call this. They will be like, ooh, I disavow violence. I get so fucking tired of that shit, Man, shut the fuck up. What is a fucking disavowal anyway? I don't understand it. You didn't do anything wrong. Why are you apologizing for it? It's like the right wing, the DR, and even the broader conservative movement is averse to gaining power. I'm serious. What it does, it just concedes territory or complains. Conservatism, as we've seen for many decades, all it does is concede territory and bitch. And that's how I feel about our side a lot of times. Not always. There are some positive things, I believe. But, these disavowers, they're fucking weak, man. A condemnation. You didn't do anything wrong. Why are you... I guess it's just because they're trying to protect their backside. I will never be a disavower. I ain't encouraging violence or anything, but I will never disavow it. And you see, conservatives are exactly the same. Look at the January 6th protest. There's a video by Didymus Sumidid. I'll put a link to it in the box below as well. January 6th and social decomposition. You need to listen to this. I've shilled it before, I'll shill it again. Such a good message. It's kind of a pessimistic message, but it's also a very positive message, I believe. And he touches on accelerationism in it. You see, a lot of the right wing, they're like, oh gosh, it was just bad Antifa actors that were acting up at the Capitol. Which, don't get me wrong. There was federal agents there, provocateurs. But it's like, the right wing, if it was to ever win, it would apologize for fucking winning. Really, I'm serious. It is a foil for the left. And look at the summer of love back in 2020 after, St. Fentanyl Floyd overdosed. Did you ever once hear any motherfucking left-wing pundit, politician, talking head, did you ever fucking once hear them say, oh, we disavow this? Fuck no, they didn't. This is why the left wins. They support their radicals. While the right wing, and the DR as well, usually disavows. I think disavowers should be ridiculed and mocked mercilessly. About Fed jacketing. I seen that Patriot Front was in the news. I think Joe Rogan had done a little segment calling them feds. A lot of people listen to Joe Rogan, unfortunately. I also hear people saying the same things about the Blood Tribe. I believe the Hammer runs, things of that nature. They protest drag queen tranny story hour. I've been critical of Patriot Front before. And I see a lot of conservatives calling perhaps these two groups, calling them feds for whatever reason. Personally, I don't think that either of these are feds. That's something that I avoid doing. And I think it would serve you well too. I don't call people fucking feds. Because I don't have any fucking proof. I'm just a simple man. I'm just a common man. Don't get me wrong, I've got my suspicions. I've got plenty of suspicions. But I don't air them out in public. Because really, I don't have the fucking proof. I might alert some of my friends, my network, my crew. But I'm not going to sit here and call someone a fed when I have zilch as far as proof goes. Now, if you were to have proof, air it out. Let your friends know. But the conservatives, you know, fed jacketing. And you know, I've mentioned often that I am cautious about, you know, the group model, you could say. Myself, I'm not a part of any formal organization, any sort of membership list group, anything like that. And I honestly doubt that I ever will be. You know, you see these marches and these protests. If a protest shuts down Drag Queen Story Hour, I would consider that a successful protest. For sure, absolutely. Marches, I know a lot of people on our side like them, but I'm just, you know, kind of indifferent. Some people are all about it, though. One thing that I will give Patriot Front a lot of credit for, though, is that I have seen the evidence of their charitable work. They done a very good job, I believe, up in East Palestine, Ohio. I've seen a lot of things and heard a lot of things, so that's one of the best ways that you can garner public support. But as far as like a formal group, you know, I'm independent, you know. I've got my network. I've got me a little crew, you know. I think a network is going to be, it's going to prove to be more superior than a group here in the future, considering how things are accelerating. Let me interject too. As far as, you know, using the tools of the system, the prescribed, conventional tools of the system, I don't think it's possible to really hurt the system or, you know, change the system. Well, maybe change the system, but the system, like I said, is our deadly enemy. I don't think that there's going to be a lot of fruit that is bore from using the tools of the system. I mean, look at voting. You can do protests and all these things. I just don't have a lot of faith in it. Now, I may be proven wrong in the future. And if that's the case, then excellent, you know. I would rather be wrong about something, proven wrong, and us still gain ground, still win. And even in the past, I've been reading a lot about Bob Matthews and the order here lately. Now those men, they're classified as accelerationists. They were revolutionary. As Metzger said, Bob Matthews was the father of the Second American Revolution. In my opinion, you could say that Bob Matthews and his men were the best white nationalists that this country has ever produced because they were revolutionary. Because they were such a threat to the system. Bob Matthews was immolated by the feds resisting. I believe it was on December 8th, 1984. Many of his men are dead now or still locked up. I believe Richard Scutari is still locked up. I believe he's up. Possibly he might be released next year. I hope that he is. But all these men, they were just normal people. They had normal lives. Not different, really, than any of us. Except they were men that were extremely motivated. You know, I've looked a lot into the history of this movement, as my friend Pat would call it. Calling your ops, your opposition, feds, is a trick that's been around as long as this movement or ideology or whatever you would want to classify it. It's as old as it is. You look at some of the old papers, same shit was happening back then. I want to talk about a guy named Ed Fields. Ed Fields was a Klansman. I'm not sure which particular branch. I've not looked into him deeply. I believe he had a publication called The Thunderbolt, a small newsletter. And he was a prominent figure. And afterwards, in 1985, he went on the record claiming that Bob Matthews was a CIA op. The order was a glow op, a psyop, whatever you want to call it. Spineless, in my fucking opinion. Absolutely cowardly and spineless. This is why I don't have a lot of faith in the right wing or the DR. I truly don't. What I do have faith in is you, the individual, to attain the things that you want in life. And I do have faith in our race, even though I find myself bewildered and disgusted sometimes. Now, why am I an accelerationist? Why would I consider myself something like that? Well, I believe that this system that we live under, the politicians, the bankers, all the facets, the authorities, they are our deadly enemy. And things are accelerating whether we like it or not. I mean, look at what happened. Look at what happened with the coronavirus. I mean, we are subjected to manipulation that is really mind-blowing, you could say. Manipulation for the masses. And I do think that one of these days, things will come to push and shove. I mean, look at this country here in America. National divorce is on everyone's lips. Secession, there's the Greater Idaho Project going on right now. I do think balkanization is what's going to end up happening. Polarization is a good thing if you consider yourself an accelerationist. I know Trump isn't one of our guys. In fact, he was in some ways fairly deleterious to our aspirations. But one thing he did is he polarized the masses. Sometimes I wonder if the system tries to decelerate, tries to slow things down. I mean, look at when Kyle Rittenhouse was acquitted. There is evidence that I had seen, screenshots and whatnot, of some of the Antifa and some of these leftist groups were wanting to burn Minneapolis down all over again. And there's evidence, too, that some of the big names, I guess, in those groups got word that their handlers didn't want them to do such a thing. so it never materialized. They have infiltration problems just like our side of things does. Any extreme political movement has to contend with this. I consider myself an accelerationist because I do think things are going to come to push and shove one of these days. I apologize, I know this video has been all over the place. I keep remembering things that I want to add. But another reason that I would consider myself an accelerationist is because there is no better teacher than harsh, cruel reality. I mean, it's unfortunate, but this is just the way things work. You know, what it took to wake a lot of people up is seeing their demographic displacement, I should say. The European migrant crisis, I believe it was back in 2015, it woke a lot of people up. And as Tom Metzger once said, basically, our people, we haven't had our backs against the wall yet. And you know, as I see it, it's going to get worse. It's going to get a lot worse before things get better. And that's just the way things are. That's just the way I see it. And one of the things I think we're just going to have to try to do is try to survive. You know, I'll shield one more video. This is a video I made last year talking about the syndicate, white syndicates. Our side, for some reason, tends to dismiss secrecy and things of that nature as, you know, dangerous. Secrecy is something that we will have to learn to employ. It is a skill, it is a trait that I think in the future it will serve us well. But what I advocate for is trying to become as self-reliant as possible. The less that you can do, that you rely on the system for, the more better off your chances are for survival. Now, do I think a collapse is impending? I used to think like this. I mean, you've seen what happened in 2019, 2020. This, I believe, is a shallow, and it's a shallow view, and it is it's not very productive. There's no sense in hoping for a collapse. Because what I think is going to happen is that America, federal government, the system is going to just keep chugging along. Accelerationism will be, a collapse would be horrific business. And I'm not saying these things, you know, I don't say these things to make myself, puff myself up, make myself sound like some sort of hard ass. If there was a collapse, chance I wouldn't make it. There's a chance a lot of us won't make it. There will be horrors that all of us will probably witness if we survive. What I advocate for is positioning yourself to handle such a thing. You know what? The idea of a collapse is it's really not all that different than when you hear perhaps evangelical Christians saying that, you know, Jesus is coming back, the rapture is going to take me away. Unfortunately, I think civilization is a bit more resilient than we would like to give it credit for. It is fragile, but it's more resilient, it seems like. I mean, it's hard to tell. And you know, civilization itself, I hear some people, some of the bigger names, they talk about saving Western civilization. Myself, I really do not care for Western civilization. Varg has always been correct when he talks about domestication, civilization being extremely extremely, what's the word I'm looking for? I want to say deleterious, but I know I've used that word. I'll just use deleterious. And he's absolutely correct. Over-civilization produces, complacency, dependency, the things that we need to avoid. I do not care about saving Western civilization. I read an article the other day, or it was last week. They were talking about Charlemagne and how he is the father of Western civilization. And at first, my first initial reaction was, for the record, I absolutely detest Charlemagne. He killed 4,000 Saxons at the massacre of Verdun for not wanting to accept Christianity. Killed them all. I believe it was in October. I forget the year. I'd have to look at it again. And also, he is who put the you-know-whoish tribe in power. Court Jews, things of that nature. He used them for his financing, his armies and things of that nature, his projects. I despise Charlemagne. Absolutely detest him. And at first my initial reaction was to just reject this, but then I thought about it. If Western civilization is allowing a you-know-whoish tribe to control your finances, and if it is also going to war with your own kin, that's Western civilization. And a whole lot of other things that we see today. This egalitarianism, all these disgusting, degenerate things. Unfortunately, this is what I believe is the logical conclusion of the Enlightenment and a lot of the principles that it set forth. I don't care about society, by and large. I don't care about saving Western civilization. All I care about is the remnant. The remnant that will persevere. I know I sound pessimistic, but in the long run, I'm optimistic. Is there anything else? I think that's it. I think I've said my piece. If there's anything that I would encourage, don't encourage violence, but I'm not going to disavow either, because I do think it will come to it at one time, sometime in the future. Let me add too, sometimes I wonder, I mentioned about the acceleration of technology. Back during the years of meth, I would joke around with my friends, and I would sometimes say that there was a day coming where nobody is going to be able to get away with anything. We live in a decaying surveillance and police state. Also, there is the testosterone question. Lowering levels of testosterone in the masses. I often wonder if here in the future, will there be enough men to carry on some sort of violent revolution, some violent conflict when the time arises. This is why I think it's so important to improve yourself, build your own family, build your own clan, build your own tribe. Work on becoming self-reliant. I don't encourage violence, but I do encourage being prepared for violence. I do encourage a sense of militarism and danger. Because if you think about it, to be capable of danger is to be divine. And I want to see the native European become less domesticated. I want to see us reach back to how we once were in the not so distant past. I I want to see the white man become wild. And the last thing that I will leave you with, just because society is decaying all around you doesn't mean that you have to fall in a state of decay as well. In fact, if you just maintain, work on improving yourself, but even if you were just able to maintain as the shit goes downhill around you, you'll still be above everything that's around you. So don't get discouraged. Improve yourself. I think that's it. Raise hell. Long live death. And hail victory. Thank y'all for watching. Bye-bye.